When COVID started, it was an unsettling time to say the least. I think a lot of us wondered what was happening. It was scary, I think. It was confusing. What struck me most was all of a sudden my email filled with all kinds of emails talking about the opportunity that exists, the opportunity to improve the place that we love. And the one that got to me the most was from Danielle Kristmanson. One thing I like about Whistlerites generally, and Danielle specifically, is the vision for better. We live in what I think most of us think is one of the best places in the whole world. And I think it's this way because we all believe in Whistler and we want to see Whistler's success, and we're not content. We're not content with how wonderful it is. We want to see better. And I think there is a tectonic shift that's taking place in our world right now, and in Whistler specifically. And I think Danielle is a person who inspires us. Danielle is the person who inspires me, and I'm looking so forward to hearing what she has to say today. Just want to note, we are recording what Danielle says, but we won't be recording what happens in your groups afterwards. So with that, I want to pass it over to Danielle. Grateful that you've taken the time to be with us today. Danielle Kristmanson.
Thanks, you guys. For those of you who don't know me, I have a marketing and creative business here in Whistler. I'm going to share my screen and share with you just quickly by virtue of a little introduction. And then I will get into maybe introducing some of those questions that I posed to Jack in those emails. And by the way, I definitely sent more than one. Every time like something was under my skin, I sent some long email to him. Eventually, I'm sure he just like put some kind of a block on me. But my company, like I said, is Origin. We are a marketing and creative agency, but we specialize just in outdoor sport and tourism. So for those of you who don't know me or don't know Origin, this is the foundation from where the insights, and I think the reason why I got asked to potentially spark the conversations today. You can see from the list of some of our active clients that we work with all kinds of outdoor brands, outdoor manufacturers, retailers, but we also work with several resorts. And it's those resorts that I've got up on the screen here that are probably the biggest reason that in the last several months, we've been able to, I guess, sort of collate a bunch of the insights and maybe the challenges that a bunch of resorts are experiencing. We work with Whistler Blackcomb and Tourism Whistler here at home, but further afield, we work with 6 other of probably the biggest ski resorts in the 7 major key North American mountain sport markets. We work with Park City in Utah, Breckenridge in Colorado, Sun Valley in Idaho, Squaw Valley in California, Jay Peak in Vermont, and Taos in New Mexico. And I think what that sort of range of clients has allowed us is to really just expose us to the challenges that the industry as a whole is experiencing, and not just what we see here at home. And I can tell you that across the board, we are experiencing here a lot of what others are experiencing. And I think my goal really was to present perhaps some of those things that I think everyone is already sensing. The first thing I wanted to say, and I think Jack sort of put it out there, but I think there might be some people that logged on today to try and figure out how to get back to normal. And the insights in the presentation that I wanted to warm you up with is that I think that in many ways, normal is maybe not even a desirable state to get back to, that we had issues pre-COVID, that perhaps this opportunity might be presented to us now to look at it really differently. And for me, what I'd love to look at today's discussion from the lens of finding a silver lining in what will become our new tourism new normal. There's no experts in this. There are a ton of amazing tourism minds in this group. None of them have experienced what is going on here today, but there are some insights, and I've got 10 of these sort of insights / trends. They're kind of universal right now. We're seeing them across the board with all of our clients, and I'm hoping that maybe they will provide the fodder in your breakout groups later on. They gave me 10 minutes. They told me to be out of here at 4:20. They stopped talking at 4:21. So I'm not sure how far I'm going to go, but I'm going to give it a go to try and pack this in for you guys. The first one, obviously, everyone understands this, that crowds are now contentious. This is probably one of the biggest issues that big resorts like Whistler is experiencing. But it was an issue pre-COVID. It was already, crowding was already becoming an issue here. It was becoming something that we were starting to try and figure out how we were going to address. And I think the big question now is, how are we going to handle volume in this new environment that requires us to actually address it, as opposed to just live with it? And I think we've spent a lot of time in the last several years where we've just struggled to really get a grip on what crowding means for our guest experience. And I think now we're in a place where we have to figure out what it means for us operationally, what it means for us experientially. How will we manage volume in terms of the impact it has on who gets access to us? If volume has to be managed and maybe visitation somehow altered, I don't want to say diminished, but altered, the big question for me is, do we want to make sure that Whistler doesn't become a place that can only be accessed by the 1%, which is potentially a risk when we have to manage volumes in a particular way? Do we want to protect a degree of accessibility that we have when max capacity is possible to a broader range of people? That's one of my big questions as it relates to the new scenario that I think would be a really great discussion point. This trend, obvious too, events have a really uncertain future for us. Pre-COVID, this was already becoming an issue for us. Our ability to continue to produce those world-class events that Whistler has frankly become known for was starting to come into question. We saw that Vail was backing away from that large-scale event production. Interestingly, it was something that we always sort of relied on Whistler Blackcomb to do. As they have taken a step back, the community is sort of scrambling to find people or organizations to produce those events that were traditionally super important to the vibe that was the cornerstone of Whistler's brand. And I think the big question for us now is, how does a resort that was built on that vibe and the celebration that is created around big events reinvent itself in a time that probably prohibits them and probably limits our ability to rely on that for vibe moving forward? That will be a really interesting question for us in the future. The third trend we're seeing is that nature is becoming everyone's escape. It used to be that there was all kinds of different people in the world and we all did different things to get away from our daily lives. With COVID, what we've seen is that the outdoors is being touted as the safest place that you can be, and certainly one of the best places to seek refuge or rejuvenation and recreation in this time. So as nature is sort of trumping city experiences like museums or galleries or amusement parks or nightlife or restaurants and that sort of stuff, even when mountains in the nature category are even rating higher than other outdoor experiences like beaches, the big question for me is when some of those environments, especially ones that we have, were already potentially under threat, what happens when the masses are seeking it out in greater levels? How can we benefit from this trend that nature is trending and nature's in a renaissance phase? How can we benefit, but how can we still protect and sustain this sensitive environment, because it's really a cornerstone to the tourism experience for us? I know that was probably talked about in the environment session the other day. Trend number 4 is around micro-tripping. This is a new word for some. It's not the same as micro-dosing. It is this similar to the staycation idea, but what it really is about is this idea of more smaller trips close to home for travelers and tourists. And the idea that the long haul destination trip is probably going to see some declines. And we know that it's going to happen at least in the near future, but perhaps even in the sort of, as we look further out, air travel has a stigma, and the seat back trays on airplanes that might have been sort of irritating but innocuous before are probably the least of our concerns in sitting on planes with strangers from around the world. This is going to have an impact overall, and this idea of attracting new guests from within a drive market that supports this micro-tripping mentality is something that we really haven't done. Sorry, I don't want to say that. It's really something we haven't prioritized. We've certainly done it, and Whistler Blackcomb and Tourism Whistler both have regional campaigns in play, but they're typically secondary to the destination guests that we have chased for so long. What we're seeing is the regional guests are becoming more and more rare and less frequently targeted in the pre-COVID era. And the big question now is that as these small trips within a short distance from home become the norm, how will we re-engage those guests that are within a micro trip range? The question after that is, if we do attract them, what kind of experiences are they going to seek out? Because they are probably already familiar with our iconic experiences that a destination guest would seek out, but they've done it and they're looking for something else. So that will be a big question. What will that mean for our marketing? What will it mean for our product development as a resort as a whole? How will we attract those types of guests and give them something, a reason to come? What does it do when micro-tripping is usually in a car? What's it going to do to traffic congestion, parking, all of those things that we will have to start thinking about in the near future. Trend number 5 is that business travel has been blunted, and we understand that clearly. It's something that we probably don't need to say much more about it, except that it's going to take some time to recover. There are some people out there saying that it may never recover to pre-COVID volumes, and we know that businesses are risk averse, and opening up their people and their partners to inherent risks of large groups and destination travel is probably going to become unpalatable. So the question here is, how will the declines in our business travel impact our shoulder seasons? How will it impact occupancy and compression and ADR and employee retention and all of those sorts of things? Are there going to be new ways that we have to look to fill those traditional valleys that we have on the other side of our peak times that have traditionally been sustained by MICE and business travel? This trend I put in, it's really macro, but it's this idea that as a whole, we may, as like a travel population, we may be becoming more thoughtful citizens of the world. This idea that gone are the days where we didn't understand the impact of our travels. Gone are the days where we couldn't connect the dots between climate change and wildlife and nature management and pandemics and the impact on tourism. When we see things like deforestation leading to bats' proximity to pigs, proximity to humans, and Wuhan and Whistler have the same issues in common, what we see is a bunch of people who don't want to stop traveling, but they are becoming more cognizant of the impacts of their travels. And I think it's going to potentially create a whole new kind of leisure traveler who's going to be looking for more thoughtful ways to engage with destinations like ours. We began this discussion on, what type of person is our best guest with the work that we did with Tourism Whistler in their rebrand earlier this year. The big question is, can we be the destination of the enlightened global citizen? That's maybe something that is really inspiring to think about. Trend number 4, macro planning goes mainstream. This is really aligned with this idea of a more enlightened global citizen. But as long-haul leisure travel becomes less frequent, those people who are doing it are trying to figure out ways to have a richer, deeper experience in those destinations. We're not going to see those long weekend, jet set travels across, the continent or across the world like we did before. And they're going to probably have longer stays, less frequent trips. And in anticipation of that trip, they're going to do a bunch of planning, and they're going to be looking for ways that they can be really engaged and do a deep dive and become more thoughtful participants in the experiences that we have here. Trend 8, digital nomadism is set to rise. This one is quite obvious. Pre-COVID, the midweek remained challenging for us always. We were always trying to figure out what to do to draw people here. What we're all wondering now is, will the decline of office work create new opportunities with new target audiences? I was on meetings with clients this afternoon, and 2 of those resorts that I had up earlier are already seeing an influx of that type of traveler that is filling in sort of high need periods. Booking windows are narrowing, and in a demonstration of how quickly these trends are changing, one of those clients told me today that actually the windows aren't narrowing at all. They're actually still really long, but they are, the guest is really requiring all kinds of assurances around the flexibility of those bookings. Pre-COVID was the pre-commitment era. The question that we have to ask ourselves is, can we create certainty for our business when guests seek flexibility? And then finally, this is the last one, and that is that all of the recovery signals that we are seeing are really mixed, and they change almost every day, and I think all of you know this. The future is super uncertain, and the question that we have to ask ourselves is, how can, moving forward, we become really more nimble and reactive so that the next challenge that is presented to us is something that we're perhaps better equipped to react to and deal with. And that is like the 10-minute stimulation for the rest of your conversations, and I'm looking forward to joining them.
Great, thank you, Danielle. There was a lot of good, dense material for us to work with in the next hour now when we go into our conversations. I love the idea of attracting the enlightened global citizen, perhaps the idea of also providing enlightened global citizens as people go away from Whistler. So thanks for that.